These guys and gals are ring-tailed lemurs, and I'm deep inside their world at the Royal Melbourne Zoo. A little later on, I'll be showing you how these tropical characters are being made to feel at home in Melbourne. But first, let's see what else is on this week's show.
I'm profiling an adaptable group of tropical plants, anthuriums. I'll show you how to grow them.
If you like a splash of silver in the garden, this could be just the plant for you. It grows on the sniff of an empty fertiliser bag.
In the Perth suburb of Greenwood, this garden is, well, unlike most of its neighbours. Let me show you a garden called Gandhara.
Many of my mates complain about having a glut of zucchini at this time of the year off only 1 or 2 plants. I harvest early when they're young like that. They're nice and sweet. When they get a bit too big, like the one over there, they turn woody. And then all they're really good for is pickling. And bear in mind that a zucchini can go from this to this in one good day. So my advice to stop the glut is to harvest small and harvest often. Well, that's some great looking produce, but that's about it for the summer crops. Now it's early autumn, the time for us cool climate gardeners to put in some brassicas. In this case, cabbages and Brussels sprouts. In a crop rotation system, brassicas usually follow legumes. Things like peas and beans put nitrogen into the soil, and brassicas love nitrogen. A barrow load of mixed manure will add more nitrogen and other nutrients, and 2 barrows of compost will condition and feed the soil. Now, brassicas like a soil pH of about 6 or 7, which this is. If your soil is a little bit acidic, you might want to add some lime. But bear in mind, if you're going to add manure, add the lime a couple of weeks beforehand. If you add it at the same time, they work against each other, and the nutrients actually become less available to the plants in the ground. The other added benefit of sweetening your soil is that it can help prevent a nasty fungal problem that affects brassicas, called clubroot. Down to business. I'm putting in the Brussels sprouts first. The old saying goes, plant seeds dry and seedlings wet. Normally I don't worry, but today is a warm one. So I'm digging my planting holes, filling them with water, letting them settle, and then planting. The thing about Brussels sprouts is they're a big plant, so I like to give them plenty of space between them, about 80 centimetres to a metre. They're also very tall. They can get up to 1 metre to 1.20 metres. So I'm planting them on the southern side of this bed so they don't overshadow the other crops. Timing is everything with Brussels sprouts. If you put them in too early when it's too warm, they'll bolt, go to seed, and you won't get any sprouts. But if you wait for too long and it's too cold, you'll get leaves and flower spikes, but still no sprouts. Here in Hobart, late summer, early autumn is the time for them to go in. But if your climate is warmer, you should plant them a bit later. After years of growing Brussels sprouts, there's a few things I've learned. Firstly, any leaves that are touching the ground, remove them. It can help prevent any pests and diseases from travelling up the plant. Also, your sprouts mature from the bottom up, so always start harvesting from the base. The other brassicas I'm planting today are cabbages. Now, like the Brussels sprouts, these are a big plant, so I'm giving them about 80 centimetres to 1 metre between them. I've got 4 different varieties of cabbage, all from the capitata group, which means headed. I've got green, white, red, and the Savoy. Because cabbages are such hungry plants, they're really prone to nutrient deficiencies. If you find they have hollow stems, then you need more boron. If the outside of the leaves look deformed and a bit scorched, then this is usually a lack of calcium. And if the leaves start to develop a purple tinge, you need more phosphorus. Now I'm planting in these little craters because they're a great way of collecting any rain or irrigation water, just in case we have a dry autumn. But if your soil doesn't drain well, you're better off planting at soil level or even into a mound. Well, there you go. But one last thing. Cabbages and Brussels sprouts are just as tasty to a range of pests as they are to us. The good news is a lot of those pests go into their dormancy over the winter. But till that happens, Jerry gave me a great idea. By planting another brassica, in this case landcress, you're using this as a bit of a sacrificial crop. The idea being they'll go for this, gorge themselves, and leave my cabbages alone. See you next time.
On a recent trip to Sri Lanka, I was amazed by the amount of anthuriums that were growing everywhere. These are beautiful, adaptable, tropical plants that really should be more widely grown. And I'm going to show you how. Most of the varieties that we grow are derived from the species Anthurium andrianum. It's adaptable because it's used to relatively cool conditions and relatively low light conditions, which means if you live in a temperate area, you can grow these as indoor houseplants, and if you live in a frost-free climate, you can grow them outdoors as show plants. When people look at these flowers, they think that this red shield-shaped part is actually the bloom, but it's not. It's a bract, and it's called the spathe. This column here, that's the flower, and it's called the spadix. This is the reproductive part, and all these little spots on it are individual flowers. Anthuriums are epiphytic plants, which means they grow on rocks or on trees, and that means they need perfect drainage around their roots. So I use equal parts of premium potting mix and decomposed sugarcane, and I mix this up. Now I use a terracotta pot because another critical thing is too much water in winter. Terracotta breathes. It makes it much more difficult for the roots to suffocate and die if you overwater. And you can see just how fleshy these roots are. Look at that. Overwatering can cause the roots to rot. So let plants go dry in between each drink. Anthuriums are gregarious plants, and as this main plant grows, I can break off little divisions and plant them into these pockets. And I think that will display this plant at its absolute best. Anthuriums are found the world over, and for a very good reason. They're a beautiful plant, and if you treat them carefully, they will flower almost all year round. And for me, well, it's a souvenir of a happy holiday I can keep forever.
I'm Greg Moore, and for the last 40 years I've been working with trees at the University of Melbourne, and more specifically here at the Burnley campus of the University of Melbourne. I've always loved trees. I loved them as a kid. I loved to climb them. I loved the fact that you got a view of the world when you're up on top of them. And so I suppose it was natural that when I went to the University of Melbourne to study botany, my attention turned to trees. And luckily for me, I've been working with trees ever since. I suppose in some ways you could describe me as a plant mechanic. I like to know how they work. I like the fact that they can cope with the environment, that they're resilient, and that at one level they're unpredictable, and then at the other level, once you understand how they work and what they do, they're entirely predictable. They perform so many different services and functions in the urban environment. Most obviously, I suppose, is the fact that they provide us such wonderful shade. And then, of course, they filter wind in storms and they soak up water after heavy rainfall. But they're much more important than just those things. Trees provide us with a link to nature. They're really good for our health, and I don't just mean our physical health. They're good for our psychological health. We well know that trees can help people live better quality lives and can live for longer. So the services and functions that trees provide in a city are many and varied. I'm frequently asked what's my favourite tree. It would be like asking someone if they have a favourite child, and we love them all. But I could think I can get it down to two. I do love the golden elm on the corner of Punt Road. I love it because it's large. I love it because it's spectacular in autumn in that foliage. I love the fact that it's visible, that so many people go past that tree, they know that tree, and those people that see that tree on a daily basis during their peak hour traffic commute, they're the custodians of that tree. When Melbourne City Council did their survey of trees and made it possible for people to email to the trees and for the tree to respond, which was a world first, and it attracted attention all around the world, that response. That tree literally got love letters. Now, it wasn't the only tree that got love letters, but it certainly got more than its fair share.
Dear tree, if you are that big, round, beautiful, low-hanging tree, I think you are my favourite tree.
Hello, dearest elm. Do you remember when I used to drive past you and say hello?
You are my favourite tree, even when you make me stoop over during my morning run.
How old are you? I've always wondered about you ever since my slightly strange driving.
So lovely to be appreciated. I'm lucky to be well looked after. Best wishes, your special elm.
The second tree that I've chosen as one of my favourites is the famous river red gum, Eucalyptus camaldulensis. And river red gum has to be a favourite, partly because it's such an iconic Australian tree. One of the things I love about it is that it's resilient, it grows in places where people love to go, very long-lived. It can easily get to 600, 700, maybe 800 to 1,000 years old. The river red gum at Burnley, for example, has been one of my favourites. In the 40 years that I've known it intimately, has had its ups and downs, but it's still a splendid, splendid tree, far older than the college, which is 125 years, far older than the garden, which is about 170 years, and in fact predates any European connection with this part of Australia. One of the important symbols that trees provide is some sense of stability and connection with the past, but they also provide us with a connection in the future. So the fact that trees span multiple human generations, I think, sort of anchors us and provides us with some connection to the city. When we look after trees, we don't do it just for our current generation, we're doing it for future generations. And that's one of the great benefits that I've found in working with trees. You can do something and you know that the benefits of that action are going to be realised 20, 50, 100, maybe even 200 years to the future. Now, what other aspect of your life is likely to leave that sort of an imprint? It's really worthwhile.
People often ask me why the leaves of their box hedges go that sort of orangey browny colour. Well, it's because over the years there's been fertiliser added, the soil has gone a little bit too acidic and it locks up the nutrients. By applying dolomite lime, you'll raise the pH and those nutrients in the soil will be released. The leaves will go from that colour to this nice glossy green.
Why are my olive trees not producing much this year, but they were laden last year? Well, it can be a range of factors, from environmental to cultural, but mainly it's because olive trees are biennial fruiters. Certain varieties like Frantoria and Manzanilla, I've found this isn't as obvious, but other varieties like Bonea and Picao tend to have that big year and small year. But with correct pruning and thinning out in the on year, you can increase your yield in the off year.
Canker is one of the most frequently encountered diseases of tomatoes. It's caused by a bacterium which is really abundant. It starts, generally speaking, if people start foliar feeding or wetting the leaves of tomatoes. So when you water them water them at the base and do it during the morning so that the plants can dry out. If the plants become infected, it starts with the leaves. Remove them and put them in the compost. It will eventually spread through the stems and reduce the quality of your crop, but it is possible to get a decent crop even from diseased plants, so don't rip them out immediately. This bacteria doesn't last very long in the compost heap, so you've got no worries about reinfecting future crops.
The purpose of any mulch is to reduce our water use, to insulate the soil and to stop the competition from weeds. But you can actually do it using plants, and we call it living mulch. So how do you do it using plants? Well, first off, you select dense ground covers and then you plant them slightly closer together than you normally would so that they grow into each other. And it works really well. Here I've got this gorgeous Artemisia genipii, looking stunning, and further down the driveway is the Myoporum parvifolium, which looks fantastic too. Both are doing a great job as living mulch.
Come meet these characters. Here we go. This is lemur paradise. I'm at Lemur Island at Royal Melbourne Zoo. And this place has been designed to specifically make the lemurs feel at home. And my job today is to find out how the staff have achieved it. Lemur Island is essentially a giant aviary with boardwalks leading visitors through rainforest, savanna and arid plant communities that are loosely based on the Madagascan landscape. Excuse me. I might just take that off. Damien Lewis is the senior primate specialist at the zoo. So if anyone's going to know what makes a lemur tick, it's him. So the carrots are special treats?
The carrots are a special treat, Costa. We removed fruit from their diet because we discovered that the high sugar levels were having a behavioural effect on them. Rather than it being banana, the carrots have become the favourites.
So these guys are Madagascan?
They are Madagascan. All the lemurs come from Madagascar. It's been so isolated, you have the plants and the animals are quite unique to that area.
To make these furry folk feel at home requires more than an occasional handful of carrots. What they really need is plants. Plants to climb on and plants to eat. And the man that makes all that happen is the head honcho of horticulture at the zoo, Richard Rowe.
It's a real horticultural challenge here to try and balance a nice environment and one that they're not going to destroy.
Absolutely, and balance is the word, and there are things which will eventually fall over because the animals have had too much impact, but that's okay. This is their landscape, first and foremost. Human second, so like a botanic garden, we want to keep things looking aesthetically top-notch, but there's always a bit of a balance between those two things. So this is what happens with the beautiful Allobarbaris. The lemurs have got these scent-marking glands on their sort of wrists, and each time they come up here, make these marks, and over time it has a really serious effect on the tree, and in fact this one's gradually being ring-barked. So this will eventually need to be replaced. And we had no idea they were going to do this, but this is what's happened. And it's one of the challenges, working really closely with animals and getting plants that animals like but don't like too much.
Madagascar's climate is a lot different to Melbourne's, and many of its tropical plants just won't thrive here. So Richard and his team had to find other ways to replicate the lemur's habitat.
Any surprising successes in here?
Successes and failures, yeah. So some great successes with Australian plants. There's a lot of lomandras in here, a lot of crinums, Dorianthes, all doing extraordinarily well. All the water plants through the waterway through here, they're all local plants and they're doing exceptionally well.
What's been served up for their breakfast?
This is ash tree, which each day there are various bits of material brought in. There are several thousand branches brought into the zoo each week. So a very large part of our horticulturist role is to grow, harvest and maintain fresh plant material for a range of animals.
I'm really fascinated by the fact that the stakes are high here, because you can't just run down the road to the supermarket and buy some lemur food.
Look, you can't. So we have these plantations at Werribee Zoo where all this fresh material is grown. It takes a lot of time, a lot of planning to actually get it right. Everything you can to bring out natural sort of wild behaviour. That's when animals and people really start to connect strongly, when you've got that natural behaviour happening.
I'm just looking at the way people are responding in here with them this close.
It's a really beautiful exhibit, and just by seeing how the lemurs interact around the people and seeing people's perceptions change, chatting with them as they come through the door, it's like, oh, can we actually go in there? Are we allowed in there with them?
He's got his arms out. I think he's sunbathing.
I don't want to break up their conference, but it's been such a pleasure to spend some time up close and personal with these beautiful creatures and to see the impact they have on everyone, young and old, that comes and visits. And speaking of visits, if you come to Melbourne, make a point of coming by Lemur Island. You won't be disappointed. Thanks for having me, team.
If you like a splash of silver in the garden, this could be just the plant for you. It's an Australian native called Senna artemisioides, or silver senna. It grows in western New South Wales, but it can adapt to more humid coastal climates. It's very quick growing because it's a legume. It fixes its own nitrogen, which means it grows on the sniff of an empty fertiliser bag. It's also known as the silver senna because of this delightful feathery foliage, which lights up with these buttercup yellow flowers in spring. It's a gorgeous option for the garden.
I love seeing how people manage to make their gardens so personal. They go beyond herbaceous borders and lawns to make a place a bit quirky or thoughtful or even a bit puzzling. A garden that speaks to them and of who they are. That said, let me show you a garden called Gandara. In the Perth suburb of Greenwood, this garden is, well, unlike most of its neighbours. Paul, I'm getting a sense of the theme of your plant palette in this garden, and that is tough.
Yes.
Tough.
Absolutely.
And tough.
And tougher.
Tell us about it.
Well, we're not avid gardeners in the sense of looking after flowers. So it had to be a garden that almost looked after itself, I suppose, is how we looked at it. We love the structure of plants, so we've gone for the structural...
Euphorbias?
Euphorbias, yes, and succulents and things like that. We've experimented with heights, so things in pots and in the garden bed itself, but within a pot, contained within a pot.
And you've squeezed a lot in.
The beauty of succulents and the beauty of cacti is you can just break a piece off and shove it in. So essentially we've done that, as you can sort of see here. It's a jumble, it's a bit of a mess, but in some respects we love that sort of complexity of the garden. It adds something to its interest, I suppose.
And I've got to ask, the garden's looking pretty full.
Yes.
Is there room for anything more, be it mosaic or plants?
Always, because as Gandara says, it's in the striving, it is in the seeking that you gain your utopia.
2 gum trees, Eucalyptus grandis, and a West Australian salmon gum were the first things planted 36 years ago. Magnificent as they are, these huge trees share the space with the main attraction that's created here. In this studio, in the front yard. Lisa Batali, in another life, was an art teacher. Husband Paul, an accountant. Today their business is multicoloured, the making, selling and teaching people about mosaics.
I was a quilter before and I used to teach decoupage. Both of those things are cutting things up and reassembling them. So mosaics is the same.
With mosaics, it's a case of taking what you have and working with the shapes and coming up with your own ideas, your own inspiration to make things look rather interesting, rather different, and you draw your inspiration from what you're doing.
Now, we've all seen this before. Second-hand large pavers surrounded by an old red brick trim. But let me show you one of my favourite things in this garden. Have a look at this. Here were these broken pavers. They've been filled in with this lovely mosaic. Now, I reckon that's a really clever little detail. It really brings the tiles to life, plenty of character, and I reckon it looks great. And I'm keen to give it a go, so over to you.
So you've picked a snail.
Okay, which is kind of ironic because I'm always trying to get rid of them.
Okay.
But, anyway, I thought it'd be fun.
So the first thing we're going to do is the spiral. So we're going to put a line of glue like that, and then you're going to start putting these on. You want to put them on, not quite touching.
Well, there you have it, my very first mosaic. Now, I've grouted it using common tile grout, and it's mounted on structural ply, which means this will last outdoors. And I know just the garden to put it in.
Well, that's all we've got time for this week. What did you think of the show? Oh, they're heading off to check out what's on next week's show. Let's have a look.
Remember the 70s? Indoor plants did run a bit rampant, but I've met an interior designer who keeps his indoor plants well under control, and he uses them with great effect. And he's got some terrific tips.
This box contains a precious cargo. 1 queen, 10,000 workers, and a little bit of honey. Later on, what was 1 will become 2 when we double down on the hive.
And I'll be giving the owner of this emerald green oasis some tips on how to bring more colour into her garden.